I think one thing that changes clearly when you have an RBA is that you define the problem supposedly differently, right? You define the problem differently. And I believe that there is no doubt about it. It really does that. If you're talking about, increasing food production in region X, or you're talking about increasing or improving the right to food in region X, you are probably likely to start talking differently about what the nature of your job is, about the sort of range of actions. Probably they're going to be broader, I would say, a priori, that you will be engaged in, maybe even the sort of organizations that you might partner up with. Something is, I think, indeed bound to change. Hélène Piron, she makes a distinction there when she's evaluating DFID's work between a legal approach to RBA and a social mobilization, and I think that was the term, right? Sort of approach. And the legal approach, it didn't come up that much here in this workshop, really, right? Although it is there, actually, in some of these things. The legal approach says that the advantage of RBA is universal standards, for example, that are beyond the local, beyond discussion, supposedly. They are jus cogens, which is Spanish, and it means, no, it's not. It's Latin, and it means mandatory law, supposedly, right? And a certain power would come from having that on your side. A certain objectiveness, beyond discussion type of situation. And that it makes you look precisely at laws and the state, which is the duty bearer, isn't it, and so on. It has been there. But not much in this conference. It's been only a bit there. I think most of us, seemingly de facto, have been more in a sort of social mobilization vision of what RBA amounts to, where it's about grassroots capacities, about knowledge being spread widely, about accountability in a much broader definition than only law, and so on. Personally, I situate myself there as well. So I want to tease a little bit, dig a bit deeper into that, what I think I heard. And so I think the central concept of an RBA approach is accountability, somehow. It has to do with that. That's what really, really changes to me. And I see 4 types, which are really 5. So the first one is indeed that old, when you talk about the rights-based approach, anytime, including in conflict, you are talking supposedly about the relation between a rights holder and a duty bearer, right? As opposed to a beneficiary and a donor or whatever, right? And it does make supposedly a difference. Now, in standard human rights law or standard international law, the duty bearer is always the state, the only possible subject of international law. And so this is clearly the very first thing that comes to your mind when you do RBA. You're starting to talk right away about the law, potentially, and more broadly about politics and power and policies. Under conditions of conflict, violent conflict, this probably becomes harder to do, because the sanctions could be tougher. It seems to be. Many people have talked about the issues then of security, how do you do this, and so on. It probably actually gets tougher to do under conditions of conflict, violent conflict. On the other hand, maybe it makes the issues clearer. Once we get the blood on the TVs and so on, it seems to become actually easier in some ways to get stuff mobilized and to get moving, because prevention is never easy, whereas reacting once the thing is staring you in the face tends to be a bit easier. So maybe violent conflict actually facilitates moving forwards in this direction, albeit at an extremely high price. On the other hand, it makes it harder, I think. Now, number 2, so this was A, or 1. 1-1. In legal terms, and then 1.2 would be, evidently we know that that even though legally spoken the only duty bearer is the state, in reality that doesn't help us that much. How about private corporations? For example, international law is busy dealing with this already, trying to see how far it applies directly as opposed to only indirectly via the state, to, say, multinational corporations or something. But it becomes even more complicated when you're talking about gender, for example, or land reform, as one of you brought up, where you can do everything you want to get a perfect state policy for land reform, but within society itself, many levers are capable of obstructing this, and hence many of the levers of change lie within society itself. So in reality, it's also about the relation between citizens themselves, right, that you're trying to work on. And I believe that is actually equally important. So it's the relations of accountability that citizens have to citizens, men to women, minorities to majorities, rich to poor. It's a whole new field that opens itself up, where, for that matter, conflict resolution technologies become very useful as well in dialogues and facilitation and breaking through stereotypes, in creating connections amongst people. That sort of people-to-people work does become very important, and can be actually possibly a basis for pushing forwards on the right side of things as well, with potential long-term benefits later down the road. So that's the number one thing that I think of with accountability. Duty bearers. Foremost the state, but actually non-state actors as well, even though I realize we go far beyond law here. The number two thing is, it's about accountability between us and the people we claim to work for. And it has come back quite frequently in this workshop as well, is this whole thing about what's our accountability to them, supposedly. And I think this is really, really very important, as a matter of fact. It's about being transparent ourselves, about making information available so that people who deal with us know who we are, what we do, what we cost, for what we work, with whom we work. Things that, as far as I know, very frequently we do not do. There seems to be a general feeling, at least, for example, within CARE, that has been a major thing, right? That you can't start doing RBA to the outside if you didn't first do RBA within. Get your own house in order, sort of thing, right? You can't make progress if you don't get your own house in order first. And I think that's quite fascinating. Is your personal representative of the various groups and divisions within society? How do people, what's the relation between foreigners and local? How does your female staff have a capacity to complain and to have its voice heard for situations of sexual harassment, which are often very much rife in many countries that I know and involve your own staff? How do people get jobs often? But through trading sexual favors and so on. But I think I have been talking already quite a long time, and I'm not going to go into this anymore. I just was wondering if there is anybody who would like to correct or contradict or add on a few smart...